minutes before. Okay. Okay, wonderful. So great that all of you are here, and I'll just share a little bit about the flow of today's event so that you know what to expect. Let's get straight into today's agenda. So we will be sharing a little bit about the Bioregionalism Working Group. This group is emergent one that has been formed.
वो somehow on नहीं हो रहा है.
Sorry. Can everybody keep their mics mute for a while? Okay, thank you so much. So I'll just start again. So this South Asia Bioregionalism Working Group, which we will briefly share you about, is an emergent group, a newly formed group, and this is the first public event that we are doing. And so today's session will be sharing a little bit about where this group emerged from, how it emerged, what was the thinking around it, and what we are currently doing. And then we will share. The main part of this session is to actually share one of our first reports around the history of bioregions in India. And we will have a moderated discussion around that, more of a conversation between the authors and the moderator. And then we will open up this space for all of you to come in, share your reflections, questions, and hopefully also become part of this emergent process and join us in our conversations. So that's the plan for today. And we really hope that this becomes an exciting space for all of you, and all of you can join us. So I would now like to welcome Rajni ji to share with us briefly about the vision and the need by in today's time, and maybe also reflect a little bit on about what do we mean by bioregionalism. It's a heavy loaded term, so also speaking to that. Yes, over to you, Rajni ji. And before
no, go ahead. No, go ahead, Shrishti. You were saying something else.
I was saying that before you speak, also introduce yourself to the group the way you would like.
Okay. So greetings, namaste to all. And first of all, I'm so delighted to see how far this group has come, and you know how fast. So my name is Rajni Bakshi. Sorry, just one second. The doorbell rang. I had to attend to that. So my name is Rajni Bakshi. I live in Bombay. I have been a journalist and an author, and I am actually not a very a writer as such on environment, but it has been the running thread through most of my work. And we were all in a Vikalp Sangam meeting, I think at the School for Democracy, and when this idea came up, that unless we facilitate or encourage and inspire the larger discourse to start looking at the situations and the problems and challenges that we are facing, whether in political economy or society in bioregional terms, there is a great danger that what are actually going to be ecological phenomenon, I mean ecologically driven phenomenon, will only be seen in terms of societal conflict. Actually, that was my main motivating force. And the example that I always gave at that stage was that if indeed, say, 1/3 of Bangladesh is going to become unlivable. Now, some people say that's by 2040, some people say it's sooner, some people say it's 2050. That doesn't really matter, as we are seeing time passes very fast. So if that happens, there is going to be massive movement of populations. And in the current political, cultural, social climate, those movements of populations will be seen only in divisive and threatening terms, when in fact, the people will be ecological refugees. So that was my main, and by the way, since then I have realized that an equally dire situation is likely to play out on the other side, which is that if indeed the Indus goes through rapid cycles of floods and then, extreme shortages of water, if glacier melt happens at the rates we are now told it will happen, then Pakistan is going to face a huge water crisis. And there is no way that the social, cultural, and political impacts of those, will be isolated. So here's the paradox, and I'll just close with this. For us, what is the challenge for us? Because I think this is enough from me on why this group came into existence. I've explained my motivation. But the challenge going forward, I think, is like this, that at the moment, and now please bear with me, I'm deliberately going to present it in an oversimplistic form. We have the two extremes that we have is a mainstream thinking on political economy that doesn't even know that how nature behaves, or doesn't care how the flows of nature operate, and will therefore have no patience for a concept like bioregionalism. So that's the one far extreme. And the other far extreme, and which is pretty much in our circles, is that we think, or to imagine that if we could just put an ecological perspective on things, then that would solve our social, political, and cultural conflicts. Now, so my understanding is that both extremes have got it wrong, and the social and cultural problems are not going to go away if we begin to look at them with a bioregional lens or layer. And yet there is at the same time no escape from trying at least to introduce the concept into our political discourse. Nature does not recognize either national or urban city, rural or urban, or regional and state line boundaries. I'm not going into all the many conflicts inside India, which we know if we see them in a bioregional context, they will look very different. So how I see our main role is to provide a rich ground in which these two extremes, whether or not they are taken into account, that we inhabit a new space where we are equally curious and rigorously engaged with the bioregional dimension, but also bearing in mind the reality and the history of why the social, political, and cultural contexts exist. And I think we have a potential. This group has so much energy. I'm really amazed. And by the way, I must tell you all, I'm a bit of an interloper here. I told Namrata, mujhe kyun bula rahe ho? I'm like a bad non-resident member of this group. But I tell you, I feel so thrilled to see the energy in it. And I'm sure that we are going to play a role, in bridging these extremes and making a contribution to the mainstream discourse. Thank you so much, and welcome to all.
Thanks, Rajni. So I would now like to invite Ashish to speak, although Rajni started in her comments about the group's origin, but maybe we can elaborate a little bit more about the group's origin, what it envisions to do, what are already our activities underway, so that then we can move to the main part of this conversation today. Over to you, Ashish.
Thanks, Shrishti, and thanks, Rajni, for laying the grounds for this. So I'll quickly get into it. I'm Ashish Kothari. I work with Kalpavriksha in Pune and also help to coordinate the I'll describe in a minute, and the global tapestry of alternatives. So like Rajni's already said, this particular working group emerged from a Vikalp Sangam that we organized. Just to very briefly give you a context, many of you may already be familiar with it, but the Vikalp Sangam, or the Alternatives Confluence process, began in 2014 as an attempt to try and bring together people who are practicing and or envisioning alternative presents and futures, which are very different from the currently dominant system, which is very heavily centralized power, has heavily centralized power in the state or in capitalist corporations, in older forms of patriarchy, racism, and so on. So we know that there are thousands and thousands of initiatives that trying to find alternatives, many of them extremely successfully happening on the ground, many of them still kind of in conception. But there hasn't been any forum to bring them together, to share, to collaborate, to do more collective activities, and also crucially to envision what kind of a India we want, and hopefully increasingly what kind of South Asia, and then what kind of a world we want. and how do we get there. So that was the origin of the setting up of the Vikalp Sangam process platform. It's a process, it's not an organization. It brings together more than 80 national level movements or local level movements and organizations and networks of varying different kinds across the entire range of human activity. We were at, as Rajni said, we were at a democracy Vikalp Sangam. So we have these Sangams or confluences happening on different themes in different parts of India. And there was one on democracy and Swaraj that was taking place at the Mazdoor Kisan Sangatna, the School for Democracy in Rajasthan in October 2019. And that's where this idea came up, as mentioned. Unfortunately, after that, we've all been hit by the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns imposed by the government. And so the group took a little bit of time to get off the ground, but it did finally, mostly, of course, online. And then since then, there has been a whole flurry of activity on specific projects, for instance, the one that's going to be presented today. Others, for instance, very innovative one on looking at the marine ecosystems, the entire the Indian Ocean and the surrounding areas from a bioregional perspective. There's one that's looked at the Teesta Basin from a bioregional perspective. There are others. There's a project that was also done on the process of the working group itself, trying to document, because very often what happens is that these sorts of initiatives get going, and then only after 10 years you realize that you actually don't have a document on how the process itself went, what went well, what went badly, etc. So that's also taking place, and a number of others. The idea behind the working group is very similar to what Rajni mentioned, is that we want to try and not restrict ourselves to what we think is realistic and practical, because very often we tend to do that in our everyday life. Okay, but this is not going to work, etc. So let's not even try it. Let's just stick to what we think is practical. We want to try and envision a very different South Asia. For instance, one that could be without borders, where wildlife can cross without having a fence in between, where nomadic communities can cross between, say, Ladakh and Tibet as they used to, without having a fence and the Chinese and the Indian armies in between. And that kind of a dreaming process is very important, but then also to root it on grounded practice, to see where is something like this already beginning to happen, what more needs to happen, how do people and people to people contacts happen, which can make this happen, if not tomorrow, maybe 20 years from now, 50 years from now. It might take 2 or 3 or 4 generations, we don't know. But it's actually only through this kind of envisioning that a lot of the revolutionary changes in the world have been brought about. So that's very much part of this group's work. We're hoping a lot more will happen. And as Srishti mentioned, we're hoping that a lot of you who are not already in the group will join us to help with this process. It's not just necessarily national boundaries, it could be boundaries within a country also. And that's actually the envisioning that we're going to hear today from Manuji and Nisha. Like Rajni, I think we started off with a great deal of, we weren't sure where this working group would go, but it's really done quite remarkable work. And I think at least I'm very happy to actually see this first report being publicly released. A great appreciation to both Manuji and to Nisha for actually struggling through some very challenging period during the making of this project and being able to come out with this output. As I'm sure they will themselves say, this is very preliminary output, much more needs to be done. And they will probably present that, and we hope that in the discussions also much of that can come out. So thank you, and very happy to be in this conversation. Back to Srishti.
Srishti, can I just have half a second to acknowledge and appreciate Namrata's work? There are many key people, I can't name all of them for shortage of time, who have really acted as the initial glue that has got this group off the ground. But Ashish for finding Namrata, and Namrata for being who you are, and the diligent, dedicated way in which you keep after, what shall we say, rogues like me who are more absent than present. So thank you and bless you.
Yes, I absolutely echo that thought, and I'm sure Namrata is turning red. So yeah, thanks to the amazing group of people who have also joined and are interested in this conversation. And so we don't want to miss the chance of sharing this beautiful pages through which you can know more about the work of the group, what it's doing, where it comes from, something that have already been shared, but it will keep getting updated with newer things that the group comes up with and newer projects that it gets into. It also has details about all the current projects that we are undertaking. This report, Uncovering Pre-District Bioregions of India, is being presented today, and the authors will speak more about it. And these are the other projects that are being undertaken through this group. And this is the email address where you can contact to be more in touch with the group. And these are the Instagram and Twitter pages where you can know more about the working of the group. So this is the report that is being presented today. And that's another page where South Asia Bioregionalism Working Group is being up there. And more so pages will come up based on the other organizations that become part of it. So great. Thank you, everybody. Let me just now welcome our moderator for today, Deepak Gewali. He's a hydroelectric power engineer and political economist, academician of the Nepal Academy of Science and Technology and Nepal's former Ministry of Water Resources, responsible for hydropower, irrigation, and flood control in 2002-2003. So thanks so much, Deepak ji, for joining us today and for agreeing to moderate this session. So over to you.
Thank you, Srishti. You can hear me? Okay, good. One is never sure with these technological artifacts. Okay, so we are going to have a very interesting set of discussions right now. Before I introduce our panelist speakers, let me quickly, give a background of why this is so interesting to me in particular. That's because I believe that environmental battles that were so well fought in the 70s, the first generation battles, you might call them, 70s and 80s, somehow started declining after the 90s and into the early part of the 20th century. Somewhere environmentalism and environmentalists lost themselves in procedural fetishism. And now we are coming back to a situation where we have to, reinvent the environmental movement, so to speak. So I think this is a very good start, and a good place to start is South Asia, especially with India at the center. The reason I say that is we have all the ecological regions of the world, not just in South Asia. Yes, of course. I take Nepal, take Indian Himalaya. In a distance from the Tarai to the High Himal in Nepal, in a distance of 150 kilometers, we have all the ecological zones of the world, from tropic to cold desert and Arctic. Okay, that's the equivalent of going from Lagos in Nigeria to Tromsø in Norway. Now think of the diversity that we are all part of. Okay, which is why our governance, formal official governance structure, has not come to an understanding or terms with this. With this ecological heavy diversity comes ethnic diversity, cultural diversity, linguistic diversity. We have 103 languages in Nepal, languages, not dialects, okay? And so on, and even in a small area like this. So that is the first thing. The second is that new environmentalism is now going to be very strongly tied with the catastrophe of climate change that's looming over all of us, okay? But the problem is that what has happened from my perspective is climate change was caused by the energy sector, but society is feeling the impact through the water sector. And the water sector has not come up with a decent response. Mitigation is not a water response, okay? We have to go for something else. Now, where will that something else come from? I fear and am hopeful at the same time that it is going to come from things like bioregionalism, because our bioregions, first of all, have to depend on water and the varieties of water that we have around, and the different kinds of availabilities of water that we have, which means that tomorrow's fight is not going to be just about, how much water in rivers we have or something like that. It is going to be, if we are going to achieve this Gandhian Swaraj kind of a thing, that in each of these very, very distinct areas, we'll have to talk about consumption of water and energy, which means we will have to start measuring our footprints, water and energy footprints, and how much of green water we are naturally endowed with, how much of the brown water we pump from underground using energy, and so on. So I think we are really into a very interesting thing. And I'll close by just mentioning two things that I see as part of the problems. Probably will come in the discussion and with the speakers. Now, we all are plagued by this administrative and colonial imposition of boundaries, whether they're administrative or political or whatever. Okay. What I find interesting in two community efforts in Nepal, community forestry, which is a major success story. Community forestry is, asserting its administration of regions through natural bioregions. Each community's forestry that it manages itself is a bioregion, okay, and different in the high Himal, different in the Tarai, okay. Now, other one is community electricity. Now, this is coming to terms and democratizing imposed regions. Your state electricity board, Nepal's National Electricity, Nepal Electricity Authority, impose a region through electricity grid networks. What community forestry is doing, community electricity is doing, is challenging that and saying each village has to manage its distribution itself. So I think we are into a very interesting cusp of new environmentalism as we move forward. And I hope that, this movement, this is really a movement, will go forward. So let me introduce our two panelists quickly and then move right into the panel discussion. Manu Bhatnagar is an urban regional environmental planner with the Natural Heritage Division of INTAC. He's an alumni of Cornell University and has massive amount of involvement with strategic management, environmental law, conservation of rivers, circular economy. I mean, any one of these very, very contentious things, he's in the thick of, okay? He has worked in India and Southeast Asia. So we expect, his very challenging views to come forth. Nisha Mary Poulos is an award-winning architect and regional planner. Her focus is on ecology, which has been the guiding force of her work, and the relationship with nature. She's an Erasmus Mundus scholar and is a founder of Woven Design Collaborative. And her work is founded on, regeneration. Okay, so these are the two speakers. So let me ask the first one, Manu Bhatnagar, to take the floor. You have 10 minutes, and people who are in attendance, please kindly use as much as possible the chat box and the question answer box. And the co-moderators of our session will also assist me and others in getting the questions out. And when we come to the discussion part, we'll start with that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Deepak ji, and good evening, everyone. I'll just put up a presentation through the share mechanism. I hope the screen is visible.
It is, yes.
Yeah. So let me say that I joined the group, I think sometime in January this year, or maybe a little earlier. And that was not for the present project. The idea had been, about a book which I had written that was a guidebook for river basin management. And so I was invited into the group. But, as part of one of the discussions, this idea struck me. And that was basically this, that we have got, we have been used to thinking of regions in terms of districts, an artificial construct. But what happened before then? That was the real question. The map shows you, the broad physiographic divisions of the country. But when did these get overlaid by the district system? So we, of course, know that even before the districts, we had the kingdoms, and the kingdoms divided their areas into prants, subas. But again, these were not, based upon some kind of ecologically homogeneous characteristics. They were, based on other logistical considerations. Today's India has got over 700 districts. And the first district came as early as 1792. And as the British expansion took place, more and more parts of the country were subdivided into regions, and the regions were based around these districts were based around some particular settlement and a particular logistical distance, which could be covered by the district collector in, say, a day or two, that too by horse. Now, in current times, there have been various maps which show the major macro ecological regions of India. And of course, these do not, they are so macro that it doesn't really help us in governance, which has to be more at perhaps at a micro level. We started looking at, cultural aspects. What happened, are languages, the spread of languages also connected to natural characteristics of regions? So that was one question. We also noted that culture, or rather nature, is the foundation of culture. A few slides will quickly show you that it's the natural characteristics of an area which determine the materials which are used, which determine the response to the natural characteristics, and which then results in cultural expression. So you find the architecture reflecting the ecology, the costumes, the colors. For example, these colors would be available only in the northeastern parts, and whereas these colors would be drawn from the vegetation, natural dyes which are available in the vegetation in the background. So nature determines culture, and culture then becomes the defining characteristics of a people and the region which they populate. Just developing that idea further. Now, we have various definitions of bioregions, and the first definition is a bioregion is an ecologically and geographically defined area which has homogeneous natural characteristics, spanning areas larger than single ecosystems but smaller than biomes. We can perhaps leave out the second part, but the first line, I think, is what is really relevant. So before districts, before the prants and subas, we find in the literature that there are many names of regions. These names, how were they derived? That was the question. How do we call a particular space the Vraj region or the Terai? Okay, and many other such names, Malwa in Madhya Pradesh, or the Maza region in Punjab, or the various regions of Rajasthan and so on. So that basis at this point of time had seemed very unclear. Now, when we go deeper into it, we sort of intuitively realize that the earlier names, the pre-district names, and even the pre-prants and Suba names of regions were based upon their natural characteristics, which were perceived by people over long periods of times, perhaps centuries, and where at the edges where the natural characteristics changed, that became the definition of the region. Now, was that correct? That was the idea of this project. In the meantime, the Britishers kept on making more and more districts, and as the Great Trigonometrical Survey, which commenced in 1803, as it progressed, it helped the Britishers to carve out more and more districts over the map to help them to govern. Now, with the 200 years of the district system, we find that it is sort of etched in our minds as the natural boundaries, but it is not so. And in fact, all our development plans, our system of our databases, the collection of statistics today is based upon the districts. So the district has so many, the population, even the livestock, the forest cover, everything is based upon the district. So that has become a part of our everyday life, and in fact, as part of our everyday thinking. How do we go beyond that? When we look at these in detail, we find that the districts do not conform to any ecological boundaries. So the ecological boundaries and the administrative boundaries are not coincident. And if they are not coincident, then many of the decisions which are taken for administration or development are not necessarily compliant or conforming to ecological parameters. Going along on these lines, we had a look at a whole lot of ancient literature, old maps, to see whether what we were thinking of had some basis. And we also came to this point that many of the names of places, the etymology of names also has a lot to do with perhaps geological history or their natural characteristics. Also, the concept of country. Earlier on within India, you could say Desh. Okay, Desh does not mean a country or a nation. It actually means the part of the larger landscape to which you belong. So, and this is so not only in India, in my view, it is also, if you look into the history of other nations, you would find this concept elsewhere too. So now what do? We look at a lot of literature, Megasthenes, Strabo, memoirs, colonial period literature, to see what could be found by way of clues to the names before the districts and the reason for the same. Having done so, one of the clues lay in the languages map of the country. Now, this is a macro languages map, and we all know that the number of languages is far more than what is shown over here. And so a region, like Bihar has, Magadhi, Maghai, Maithili, the three major divisions. And when you look closer, you find that the spread of the Pertler languages is also over a Pertler area. And if you go deeper into the ecological characteristics of those areas, you'll find that there are fine, distinct differences. You look at an area like Vraj. Now, the Vraj has Vraj Bhasha. Okay. And if you look, it's spread over 3 of the modern states and comprises several districts. But the ecological characteristics of the Braj region are quite homogeneous. So we got a map of India which showed all those 700 plus districts. And then we overlaid on them the old regions to the extent we could define. And we found that, with this is the map which shows the several, pre-district regions which we could identify. The white areas are where we, perhaps because of lack of time, or maybe we could not get the, information. Those are blanks which have still to be filled. But there are many, regions which we could, the pre-district names, which we could identify and identify spatially as well. So these are the 63 regions which we could come up at this point of time. I would ask my co-author Nisha if she would like to speak upon some of these maps of South India. Nisha, would you like to come in?
Yeah, sure. Or I can just do it like towards the end, if that's okay, after you're done.
Acha, okay. So these are more maps which are of South India. Nisha worked on the peninsular portion far more than I did. She will explain about these maps. And here is one very interesting pair of maps. Now, these are the pre-district names of the various regions of Rajasthan, modern Rajasthan. So we are familiar with names like Marwar and Mewar, and perhaps Shekhawati. But there are these various regions, Mewat, Dhundar, Hadoti, Wagad, Gorwar, and the desert areas. Now, this map is the modern agroecological map drawn up on the basis of scientific investigations. And now, if you see the coincidence between these, the agroecological regions and the pre-district regions, it's fairly close. For example, this is the line of the Aravalli Mountain Divide. Rajasthan is divided into the eastern and western zone by the Aravalli line. And this is that line. And if you look at this map, the older map, you find that line is very much there. Okay. If you
Manoj,
look,
I have to, as moderator, just let you know that you will have to, start wrapping it up.
all right, that's fine. So I think I made my point here. And similarly, in the case of Uttarakhand, Uttarakhand has got these two regions, Kumaon and Garhwal. And both of them have very distinct characteristics. And if you read the monograph, you'll see those characteristics in detail. Now, this is a map which is showing the agroecological regions all over India. And it could be an interesting exercise to see how they conform to the older names. Now, this is a map which is, a bit faint. This is of the Vraj region. And you'll find this is Haryana, UP, MP, and Rajasthan. Vraj is lying in 3 of these states. These black lines are showing you the districts. And so you see that there are about 3 or 4 districts which comprise the Vraj region. Now, how do we go on from this concept to something more practical? So the idea would be that we see the natural characteristics of a particular pre-district region, and we plan for those districts together rather than this district for this state or individuals, going on its own track and this one going on a separate track. The natural characteristics of the larger region would impose certain parameters upon its constituent districts, no matter in which state they lie. So that I'm sure, of course, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but that is what I think should be done. So this is my part, and I would now request Nisha to come in.
Thank you. Thank you, Manoji. Now, Nisha, please. Yeah, I've already introduced you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Manoji, and thank you, Deepakji. I'm very excited to see that this work that we've been doing is now being put out to the world. The journey of the research itself has been quite remarkable in the sense that it gave so much vocabulary to a lot of the work that I've been doing otherwise, or a lot of meaning to a lot of the problems and the solutions that the world is facing in light of climate change and ecological breakdown. So I thought I would just start today with reading out a small excerpt from the book, and which to set some context, and then go through some of the processes and then, of course, some parts of the map that is seen on this screen. So bioregionalism stresses that the determination of a bioregion is also a cultural phenomenon and emphasizes local populations, knowledge, and solutions. Compared to ecoregions, bioregions, by contrast, are human regions, informed by nature, but with a social and political element. In this way, bioregionalism is simply political localism with an ecological foundation. Bioregionalism, essence, geography, climate, plant, animal life, etc., directly influence ways for human communities to act and interact with each other, which are in turn optimal for those communities to thrive in their environment. As such, those ways to thrive in their totality, be they economic, cultural, spiritual, or political, will be distinctive in some capacity as being a product of their bioregional environment. Citing Don Alexander's 1996 paper and Ryan M's 2015 paper on the topic. So, as part of our process, we discovered there's been so much eco-regional mapping that has been done globally in the last decades, and it led to the definition of a biome and what an ecoregion represents. And while it is quite telling, the problem with the ecoregion mapping itself is that it was a byproduct of the environmental movement that separated the human being from nature. So that was, to refer back to Deepak Ji's comments about how the environment movement's dying out. This could possibly be one of the reasons that it became a very protest-oriented, removed from nature sort of an idea of human life. And as a result, there was a lot of dissonance and imbalance, which we could not really resolve. And bioregionalism possibly is the way for this reconciliation between human populations and the land that we live on, right? And the earth, which is our habitat. So this is sort of the background that informed a lot of the processes. And we started, so this was essentially a mapping exercise, research-based mapping exercise. And we started the mapping process with the intrinsic understanding of ecological boundaries and ecological characteristics that were territorial. But we did not want this to be the basis of our start point. And so we sort of set it aside theoretically. And we started at a point of exploring anthropocentric and cultural and human geography oriented ways of understanding territoriality. And this led us down very exciting pathways and very unusual resources. So everything from the Mahabharata to Sangam literature to folklore to some informal stories. We talked to people. And of course, there were a lot of limitations within this process, as which is kind of, which of course did not allow us to completely decentralize. But within what was possible, we were able to talk to people and collate a lot of information. So in a way, it was a sort of a scavenger hunt of hunting for clues. And every time we got a clue, we would delve deeper and deeper until it's unraveled and we have something that we could build upon. And one of the examples I want to take is actually of this region called Konganad, which emerged. And Konganad is actually the Salem-Trichy area, which is at the confluence, well, not the confluence itself, the region where the confluence of the Eastern Ghats and the Western Ghats occur. And it, in a way, beautifully, a boundary emerges. And as part of the bioregionalism exercise, it was also, the inquiry was, do humans as communities form natural boundaries? If we take away the colonial boundaries or the imperial boundaries of the kingdoms before, or boundaries were formed out of conflict, or boundaries that human beings were drawing out, which were artificial. But if we trace it back, can human communities, do they have natural boundaries? And do these boundaries then how does it interact as a natural with its natural environment? And that was the exercise in extracting these boundaries at the south at within the Indian subcontinent, and that was what the endeavor was, and that's what we tried to do. So the Konkanat example really sort of, so where the Eastern Ghats and the Western Ghats join, it also then at an ecological level, it creates a sort of protected area between the two mountain ranges. But it goes more than the very tangible aspect of land and mountains. It also is the region where there is a lot of connects between the Eastern and the Western Ghats. That also means like migration of insects and large mammals like elephants, which you can trace back to today's elephant conflicts, because this region is one of the regions with the heaviest number of man-animal conflicts, because this is part of the corridor of movement. And this is all, and again, it comes down to also climatic factors like winds and movements. And then it also is the mid-basin of the Kaveri River. And interestingly, the dry deciduous landscape, which was as a result of the being between the shadow region of two mountain ranges, it was resulted in this vegetation. And then the human culture evolved out of that. There was a lot of pastoralism and a lot of sort of bridging between trades. Because this was a region of movement between East and West, and also to some extent North and South. Another example that I want to speak of is actually the Western Ghats itself. If you look at the eco-region boundary, the Western Ghats comes as one large eco-regional district, right? Like it's just the entire Western Ghats is one, because yeah, it does share a lot of ecological and territorial and topographical characteristics that make it possibly a homogeneous region. But when we look at bioregions and how humans have been inhabiting these spaces and how they've been calling it home, we started seeing that it was not just one region, but almost some 8 regions or 9 regions have emerged out of it thus far. And each of those regions are so distinct. Like, for example, yeah.
Nisha, sorry to interrupt. Are you supposed to also show the slides, because we're not seeing any slides, or you're not using slides?
I'm not using slides.
Oh, okay. That's go on. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to speak a bit of the process and the sort of because we already sort of spoke of the slides and the map itself. So I was just trying to take through the intrinsic process of understanding how communities formed boundaries. Yeah, so the Western Ghats itself, then you suddenly realize there are like 8 boundaries or 9 boundaries, and one of these regions is was so again referring back to the presentation where the idea of desh or country, what it meant beyond the nation state, right? It meant like your homeland, where are you originally from? And here in the south, the word for that is nad or ura, and then that's a very commonly used term even in today's colloquial terminology, right? So when we speak of Malenad, which literally means land of rain, and that is one part of the Western Ghats which is between between the upper parts of Karnataka, like north of Coorg, all the way to Goa, that part of but the Malenad region is on the it's just the it doesn't cover the coast, it's just the mountains itself where it captured rain, so literally land of rain. And it is such a distinct region from the Western Ghats, that is from Palakkad to the northern part of Kerala, which is which boundaries on Kasargod actually. But from there is a very different way in which people inhabited these areas, and that again resulted from the type of vegetation that was found here and the type of territorial pathways that emerged out of living in such a region. So I just want to emphasize that in the way we've mapped these 63 bioregions, and this is our kind of initial effort at this. And in what we also started realizing, in many cases, the boundaries sometimes overlap. And it also changes. Sometimes seasonally boundaries could change. But that is its real beauty. And it allows us to bring complexity, bioregionalism, it allows us to bring complexity to the natural habitat and boundaries into a two-dimensional sort of source to some extent. I'll close by quoting.
Okay, you're closing. You've got 2 minutes. Yeah, this is me moderating.
I'm
got 2 minutes. Yeah.
I just wanted to close. Sure, thank you. I'll close by quoting Michael Vincent McGuinness, who writes that bioregionalism stresses upon the importance of re-inhabiting one's place and earthly home. A bioregion represents the intersections of vernacular culture. That is to say that it's a way to bring the human population back home and set us as a species back into natural habitat, and to understand this place on Earth sort of idea of us as part of the Earth that we're living on is then a very empowering resource to whether it's managing climate, or it's managing resources, or understanding migrations and movements, and allowing nature to fully exist and for us to thrive within that environment. So yeah, thank you. I'll hand the mic back to Deepak.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now we have a bit of a session with you both, just a discussion, and I'm going to give priority right now to our co-moderators and Ashish and Rajni Bakshi. But let me start with some very simple sort of provocative question. Okay, first of all, I am not sure you guys realize how revolutionary you've been. Okay, that's one side of the story, because if we really managed our living in accord with what you said, it would be a major revolution. Okay. Now, having said that, I would like to ask you and set the ball rolling right now with a general sort of a question and a more specific one, and they're related. The general one is, have you got, whether in your report or, sometimes one is hesitant to put things on report that is, only 50% or 40% sure. Have you got good examples of some specific examples of bioregionalism at work that you've seen being practiced in all the different places you've been? And tied with this is the most specific one. What I mean by this is, have you seen examples of new housing development or, new development of shopping mall versus Haat Bazaar, the traditional one, where bioregionalism has somehow figured. So I'll start with that, but then I'm going to ask Ashish and Rajni Bakshi and our co-moderators, Srishti and others, to add more questions to you guys. So please, yes. Anyone?
Yeah. Nisha, may I?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so let me say that the current administrative and political boundaries within India, they are, what we have inherited from the British, and thereafter the State Reorganization Committee way back in 1956 tried to organize these spaces, the states along linguistic lines. Now that could be called a quarter step towards bioregions if we agree with the principle that language is an expression of culture and culture is an expression of nature. So that was a quarter step. Now, what we have seen is that although we started with some 18 or 19 states, we have now crossed perhaps 30 in number. And as these states become smaller, they are perhaps more close to bioregions, not to bioregional governance, but to bioregions. An example is Jharkhand. Okay, another example could be Uttarakhand, and yet another example could be Himachal. Now, these states are much smaller. The reason why Jharkhand was split from Bihar is that it comprises mainly the tribal region and the forested area of southern Bihar. So now we have a governance mechanism, that's the state. We have a region or which could be called a bioregion in terms of homogeneous natural characteristics. But I do not see the state realizing that it is governing a bioregion. And therefore, the aspects of landscape ecology are not, is not a criteria in the development or decision making. So until landscape ecology becomes a criteria in the governance of the bioregion, which has been somehow achieved, it would not really, the potential of governance aligned with landscape ecology of the bioregion, working as a force multiplier for development, would not be realized. So we do have bioregions, but we do not have bioregional governance. And of course, these are, scattered spots which have resulted not from any thrust towards bioregionalism, but because of, cultural cleavages which separated smaller areas from larger areas, because the populations of those regions were somewhat culturally distinct and felt that they were receiving the short end of the development stick.
So your short answer is no. There is no good example. Nishaji, would you agree? And before you answer, let me give you a good example from Nepal, okay? One of the interesting things has been in tourism development in Nepal, the recent rise of ethnic restaurants, okay? We have 124 ethnic groups, and each one comes from a specific ecological region where specific food was grown, and therefore their cuisine was very ecologically determined, okay? So now we got swamped with white rice and white bread, as with everywhere else in India as well. But what has happened with the rise of ethnic restaurants, and this is my example of a good regional example, is now suddenly there's a demand for millet and bajra and all these dryland crops that people thought were poor man's food and nobody considered. But now they're in a heavy demand. And suddenly for millet, now when you have a demand for millet, the water budget goes down in agriculture amazingly because it uses residual soil moisture. You don't need irrigation for millet, okay? So this is just one example, but your response, Nishaji, and then I'll go to Ashish and Rajniji.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I have a very interesting example. So, the Western Ghats range in the Palakkad area, there's a natural gap in the Western Ghats, which is an ancient part, because it was the only penetrable part of the entire chain of Western Ghats, and it's called the Palghat Pass or the Palakkad Pass today. And so that's where the Western Ghats there's this huge gap, and if you look at the map, you can clearly see like two chains with this gap in between. And like about 65, 70 kilometers or less from this gap is the ancient port of Muziris, which is a bit north of Cochin today. And it's an ancient port where there was way pre-colonially, there was already trade happening, and it was stopping here, going to China, going to Europe. And there was a lot of, so this path between the pass and the Ghats, which actually was the only point of entry for anybody coming to this side of the Western Ghats at that point. And then the port on the other side, which allowed movement of goods even even the kingdoms of the Sangam age on the eastern side of the Western Ghats used to move this way sometimes to bring the produce to the Muziris port. But interestingly, so many years later, this region, which emerged clearly as a bioregion called Kudanad, which is Kochi, Thrissur, and Palakkad, has a very interesting pop. Everybody is Malayalam speaking and pretty homogenized when you do look, when you live there. But there are actually a lot of sub-communities that are lived there. There's a Gujarati community, there are Punjabi communities, there are Tamil communities, and in Kerala, which is otherwise pretty, non-cosmopolitan before in older times, this area is pretty cosmopolitan, and everybody is now homogenized. Everyone's speaking Malayalam, but it's a very interesting sort of example of how an ancient community from Gujarat is still living here, and they're now identifying as part of this bioregion. And it is clearly a result of this movement that is a result of the pass and the port. And the port, again, because it was, it's not like today at Vizhinjam, you can just dredge and make a port. It had to be a natural port that nature allowed. So yeah, so that's what I wanted to share.
Okay, great. There are already a lot of questions coming in both the chat box and the question answer box. So do look at them. We'll come back when we shift to the attendees who are attending this forum, and we'll get the questions there. But before that, I'm going to ask Ashish and Rajni to put in their questions, comments, and then also our co-moderators, Shrishti and company. Ashish, you want to go first, or Rajni?
No,
Rajni,
Ashish. You want me to go ahead?
Go ahead, yes.
No, I just want to congratulate the speakers. I mean, I've learned so much. Just one thought to share, which is, I'm sorry, very obvious, that, both culture and ecology are ever dynamic, right? And we know that other than the Antarctic, there may be no corner, no patch of Earth which has not been shaped by humans, and vice versa. So the nature and culture connection, is I can see from your presentations that is going to be an area in which we are going to need very, very detailed and nuanced, work. I mean, more and more people, I'm sure, will be working on this. So I look forward, to learning precisely how these changes are going. And lastly, the big bear in the room is that to have a bioregional understanding doesn't mean that it will go in favor of ecologically sound, strategies and policies. For example, the original term, blue economy, was meant to be an ecological term. It was meant to be, referring to sustainability. But today, blue economy is a term for how best to exploit the oceans for money profits. So that big bear in the room will remain, and it's something that we'll just have to keep tackling as we go along. That a finer understanding of bioregions doesn't automatically mean that it will go in favor of ecological respect for all life forms. It won't take us away from the human-centric and money-centric. So that's all, just a few of the thoughts that came to me. And thank you again to the speakers. Ashish.
Thanks, Rajni. So one question for both of them, which I think Manuji and Nisha, you can address towards the end maybe, is what are the next steps? What would you like to do after having done this report? And this is, I guess, also a question to the working group as a whole, which we need to discuss, because you've come a certain distance and a fantastic distance, but obviously there's a lot more distance to be covered. So maybe some thoughts from you on that. I have a quick comment, Deepak, on your question of actual practice. I think there are some interesting examples of this. For instance, for about almost 15 years, there was a river basin management or governance approach by communities in Rajasthan called the Arwari Panchayat. About 60 odd villages coming together to say, how do we govern this Arwari river, which is a basin which is about 400 square kilometers. It was a very interesting thing. It didn't survive beyond about 15 years for various reasons, but in those 12, 15 years, I think they came up with some very, very interesting learnings of how you could think of a basin as a governance unit, right? Looking at water flows, looking at forests as catchment, looking at how wildlife can be protected, etc. And the second one, which I think Joy Ganguly has put in the chat, is the Auroville initiative, where they're actually looking at not just Auroville, the little township itself, but also the surrounding areas as a kind of a bioregion, and regenerating the what used to be the natural forests in the area, and also looking at watersheds and things like that. Currently, Auroville is in serious trouble, but that's a whole separate issue. And then if you look at some official attempts, for instance, biosphere reserves. India has, I don't know, about 15 to 20 biosphere reserves. And in fact, a lot of those biosphere reserves are bioregions. They're fairly large areas which are sort of mapped according to their ecological characteristics, river basin and things like that. Unfortunately, the model of governance used is very top-down. Though, in fact, the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve Convention actually specifies that it should be community-based, but in India, it is not. But that is kind of one possible way of also looking at it. And then we have river basin authorities, from small ones to very large ones, Ganga River Basin Authority, etc. Most of which are failed attempts because they couldn't even get the states to work together, or for various other reasons. And also, again, very top-down, very bureaucratic, etc. But again, in terms of the sort of mindset, saying, okay, the river basin itself could be a governance unit, you have something there to learn from. And actually, both in biosphere reserves and in the river basin authorities, the caution that Rajni is putting is very important. We can already see that, but they're taking the concept, but then they're converting it into their own bureaucratic top-down kind of functioning. And the final thing I would say is regions like Ladakh and Kutch. Now, Ladakh, for instance, one can think of it as a bioregion, which contains smaller bioregions like Changthang, but Ladakh itself, and then if you were to combine it with Tibet, is a huge bioregion of many kinds, which includes all the cultural, biological, the pastoralism, all of that. And there have been some very interesting vision documents for Ladakh to look at how Ladakh could be developed, quote unquote, keeping its ecological and cultural uniqueness and characteristics in mind. Unfortunately, in the last few years, and especially since 2019 with the new status, there's a lot of New Delhi influence now, and I doubt very much that the bioregional aspects are going to be considered in how New Delhi is looking at a place like Ladakh. But it has that potential based on the past, and with some visioning exercises that have been done. So these are a few examples, Deepak, that I just wanted to bring into the conversation. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful. We're getting a very interesting set of questions in the chat box. Speakers, please kindly note them, okay? As well as our working group people, Srishti and others. Before you can also start commenting, and you can also start writing your comments right there already, okay? So, and not wait for this thing. But before we move to the attendees' questions, Srishti and others, what are your reactions?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe add a little bit, which Ashish briefly mentioned about the bioregional governance in Ladakh. And what we are seeing is that in contrast to, say, the traditional governance systems to the modern governance systems, with the problems within traditional systems of gender equity and caste issues and class issues, there is a sense of governance that encompasses the rest of nature as well. So it is connected to the land, to the mountains, to the river ecosystems, to the springs. So there are important learnings, and more so what we, I think, maybe Nisha and Manuji can reflect on this also, in terms of also how to take this study forward, is how do we make the connections between the traditional governance systems and the modern governance systems, and what it can speak to, say, the bioregional governance aspect more broadly. And then what would economies, cultures, and ecological, political aspects might look like. But I think this is also being reflected in the questions that are coming up from the participants, so that we can reflect many of those. Maybe we can shift to those questions if Deepak ji, you think that's all right.
Okay, any of your co-organizers have a comment? Otherwise, we shift to the attendees. You are getting some very interesting questions, both in the question answer box and in the chat box, okay? So please note them. And well, let me start off with somebody called VC here. has asked a very interesting question right at the beginning in the question answer, which is how do migration and the increasing trend of heterogeneous communities. Now, this migration within countries, from peri-urban to rural areas and all that. What is this doing to cultural homogeneity? Are we being completely McDonaldized across South Asia? So I think this is one important question. Let's take 2 or 3 and then we get to to Manuji and Nishaji for response and then come back again. Then another one is again related to this whole concept of sense of place. And I think that was partly replied by talking about Desh, Watan. These concepts are very different. They do not necessarily have anything to do with the administrative district collector Saab and sort of thing. Okay, so there's the questions. So let me start with this and get quick response and then come back again. Nishaji or Manuji, either of you. It's migration, and is it a positive or a negative thing for bioregionism? I'm just paraphrasing that. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I'll answer this question a little indirectly. As I was, progressing with this study, an anxiety overtook me that the way development is taking place, we are actually changing the natural characteristics.
Mm.
The bioregions are actually becoming a human-engineered landscape. So if they lose those characteristics, then the culture, the distinction, the distinctiveness that flows out of that, that natural base, that also would decline. And we are witnessing a homogenization of culture helped by, the social media, which is now so universally prevalent. Everybody thinks the same thing, thinks the same thoughts. So I feel that we are, heading in a direction where the loss of our landscape ecology is going to translate into loss of culture. And we can see that with every passing generation, our disconnect with nature has actually increased. I can recall that my parents could, very easily feel the wind and say, Pachua chal rahi hai, that is the eastern wind, and therefore it's going to rain, right? They could see that on cloudy days in the monsoon, if there are no eagles in the sky, they would say it's about to rain, and it would. So that was a kind of intuitive feel, which we who are, based on sensors and digitization, we do not have any such connect. So this is my fear that, the landscape around us, the natural characteristics are being obliterated at a very fast pace, and cultural homogenization is setting in, disconnected from its original sources.
Okay, Mary?
Yeah, I wanted to just add one more thing to that. So the mistake we must not make about when we make in bioregionalism going forward, right, is this idea of, okay, I drew a line on a map and now it's there forever, which is sort of the colonial way of drawing maps, right? And therefore that complexity of human culture and also natural environment is completely lost. So I think adaptability and flexibility in understanding bioregions itself and setting this understanding within the context of the reality of today. As Manuji was saying, there was a time when you could predict that, and that time was not so long ago, right? Like, we studied about monsoons, and on June 1st, the monsoon hits. It's not the case anymore. So we need to update those systems as well. Ecology has changed, climate is changing, and maybe bioregions are also changing. So how do we, when we are doing bioregionalism, it's very important to ask these questions as we are doing the mapping process, which is something that we were quite aware of, and also it is a difficult task, so it was something we grappled with. And the other thing also is, what are we using bioregionalism for? So is it for governance? Is it for disaster risk reduction? Is it resilience building? It could be for everything. But depending on what we're using it for, we would have to adapt and change that definition of the boundary or definition of that culture to that context. And I think that adaptability, which was lost through colonization across the world over, is something that we are bringing back, at least in theory, when we're talking about bioregionalism.
Okay, great. Let's shift to questions from the attendees.
Could I
Yeah.
just add
Yeah, sure.
I also feel that, maintaining or enhancing bioregions would also result in greater cultural diversity and all manners of diversity. And that, I think, is a very good thing, because right now we are in a phase where governance is becoming centralized, and everybody, although we may mouth, unity in diversity, but it seems that it's only unity in unity. Everything must be the same. An example is from Himachal. In Himachal, we have the lower Himachal, upper Himachal, and then we have the Lahaul Spiti region. The Lahaul Spiti region is a cold desert, more akin to Ladakh. And in spite of the great difference between Lahaul and Spiti and the rest of Himachal, the governance mechanism is exactly the same. What orders are given from the secretariat? Okay, for tourism, you will do this in Shimla. Same kind of things have to be done in the cold desert too. So everything becomes centralized, unified, and we are not looking at maintaining the diversity which the landscape had originally imposed upon us, and that is what made us into colorful, distinct people.
Okay, great. I see one question here which has caught my attention from somebody, Rosa. It says RT. It's about flooding in cities, urban flooding that we are having. Okay, and the question asked is, and I want your response here. It's natural flow of water versus what we have done by building cities where no cities were there before, this peri-urban and urban sprawl. My reframing that question to you is this. Okay. This flooding is not just about blue water in the rivers. It's also about sky rivers, or white water as we call them. Okay. What you saw in Pakistan with this flooding this time is because of some fundamental change that has happened through climate change, obviously, it looks like, with white water, sky rivers, soil, atmospheric moisture. Now that comes down and becomes green water in soil moisture, percolates into the ground as groundwater, brown water, and only that which was excess came into the river as floods. Okay. Now what we have done is we built cities all over and paved everything. So nothing pools in fields. Things run off rooftops right away. Nothing percolates into the groundwater. And then the flooding, definitely, even with normal rain, is very high. So one problem is not to blame climate change for everything. But a lot of our maldevelopment, short-sighted maldevelopment, is what is causing it. So how would you respond to that? The pressure on urban floods to do something about it, while at the same time not taking a proper look on water in its complexity, from white water to blue or green water to brown water to blue water. Your response quickly.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's what you're saying is precisely the problem, right? That we're now just completely, as of now, cities or any settlement has just been built completely ignoring all of these systems. Now, when we're starting to explore the complexity of the system, all the interacting forces, which is also what lies beneath, what lies above you are. And if you're looking at traditional societies, like if you look at the Bangalore region, right, this or the Deccan Plateau region, it was a rock landscape. And ancient communities thrived here with that understanding. Like if you look at the Hampi Vijayanagara Empire, or if you look at any of the empires that have come across the Deccan areas, there was an understanding that water flowed in a certain way. Some amount of water in certain areas, it went into rivers. And how do you conserve water for use? And how do you let the water go? But now two things are happening. One is we're sucking water out of the earth as well, which is leading to collapses of many of these stratas, which once used to contain water, and then also preventing percolation. So these are the only, absolutely, climate change is not the only cause for it, and the way to sort of regaining balance is also not just fighting it by carbon capture or whatever, as it is being done in very linear thinking formats, but rather to relook at these systems. Can we make room for at least some of these systems to come back? Can we make room for water to percolate into the earth? And when you understand how systems work, which is one of the roles of bioregionalism, to show how various systems are interacting in the form of a settlement. And when we start seeing how one connects to another, and that if it is drawn into planning, well, to start with, we have absolute lack of planning in our cities. But even if we did, if this was ignored, like we're building a road, or you're building, or you're planning a huge housing settlement that is going to support 1 million people in a particular part of the city that does not have water, just because it has, you can build a road does not mean you can build so many houses there. So this understanding, which is more complex, is sort of the solution for reversing and adapting and building resilience.
Okay, great. We have a... Yes, please. Yeah.
Could I just add to that? I think the modern planners have forgotten their respect for topography. Unless town planning aligns with the topography of a place, we are going to see these problems recur and recur. I'll just give one example. Let us look, we are all familiar with the layout of Delhi. If you look at Shahjahanabad or any of the 7 old cities of Delhi, they are all built on high ground. They never face this kind of urban flooding. If you look at the colonial city, whether it's the cantonment, the civil lines, or New Delhi, they are all built on high ground, which drains rapidly. But when we have expanded the city, where have we built? We have built in low-lying areas. And now we are, facing the music. And this is so all over. I just was in Guwahati, and Guwahati was completely flooded. Everybody has expanded into low-lying areas without any regulation whatsoever. So they are bearing the brunt of it. So unless we respect the topography, build on well-drained ground, we are going to continue to face this problem.
Okay, now we'll have to ask, both of you and others also to go through the chat box and this thing to pick up interesting questions that have been asked, and people have been very vibrant in answering themselves already there. But if there is anything missing, please do that, because I'm going to now, we're coming to the end of the program. I'm going to ask the authors to respond to with final comments, 5 minutes, with final comments, and then I have to hand it over to Srishti. But before I do that, there's a couple of questions that I see very interesting that obviously there's no easy answer right now. One is on mental health. Somebody's asked this question on mental health and how this loss of bioregionism is affecting. Is there any study on that? Now, it's obvious that these questions people have been very excited by what we have heard from you. And so therefore they're bubbling with ideas. I think these ideas need to be taken up and, for the further this thing. So, but if you could look at the question chat box and the question answer thing and see if you can pick up anything that is really challenging like that people have asked. People have already given answers there right away. And there's one more on the flood issue that I just talked about. The same story in Nepal. All our villages were built on the ridges, top ridges of mountains where the water falls and goes off. Now what happened is we build roads where they are comfortable, which is on the valley bottom, floodplains. And roads become demographic watersheds. They collect people because instead of growing maize up there and scratching a hillside, come down to a roadside, put up 4 bamboos and a tin on top of it and start a tea stall, you probably earn a lot more money than growing maize up in the hill. Okay. So people gather there, but they gather in the floodplains of the river. So naturally our floods are getting worse. And my one on the comment over here in the chat box to Joydeep Gupta, Joydeep, old friend, and an eminent environmental journalist, you asked this very interesting question, and I'm going to pose that question to you guys before I hand it over to you, which is how are you going to expand this into the neighborhood? I know India is a big place and you can spend your whole lifetime plus several other incarnations just studying things in India. But if you talk bioregions, all of South Asia, right from Afghanistan down up to, I would say, even Burma, Myanmar, is one ecological monsoon dependent region. Okay. Now you have to make sure that these neighbors are also included. What is your plan? How do you do that? And in this, my request to my good friend Joydeep is, could you get Doordarshan and all the Indian channels when they show the weather forecast to kindly get rid of the the nation boundary, because the Indian monsoon does not stop at the India-Bangladesh border or the India-Nepal border. We want to see, if you've got such good satellites giving you information on the flow of the monsoon, bloody hell, if it comes out of Bengal and Bihar, when is it coming into Nepal? But it's all blanked out. Nepal is cut off, Bangladesh is cut off. The Indian monsoon does not stop at the boundary. So if you can get these Doordarshan chaps and all that to get rid of that and just put the whole South Asian map, put the place of Shillong and Patna and Calcutta and everything on there, on dots. But if they can get rid of this silly, idea, maybe that would be a good start. So I asked the panel, I asked 2 of you to quickly respond to whatever has been missing and what people have said here. And then we go over to Srishti for the final comments. Thank you.
Well, Deepak, regarding your complaint about Doordarshan and its weather display, I'm not sure whether you'll be very happy with the reliability of their forecast. So maybe you are better off without it. Okay. Now, actually, I'm seeing that, there's one question which is rather, for me, I find it's challenging. And it is, what is the context of this study? And I'm finding very difficult to answer that. Basically, I think it's an idea before its time, or a reconnection to a pattern which existed in earlier times, and trying to see how, if we can revert to that pattern, even given the modern district system, we may perhaps find kind of a force multiplier where development actions, when taken in conformity and compliance with the landscape ecology and the other natural characteristics prevailing over a fairly large region, may bring us, far more benefits in terms of climate resilience, in terms of diversity, in terms of cultural richness, and in in many other ways, including I think somebody asked whether it can bring mental peace. Well, it would certainly open up the potential for mental peace, because I assume that the biorhythms of a particular region, if we align with them, then I think we would be better off in many ways. Nisha?
Thank you. Yeah, I want to address a couple of other questions. It's a lot of questions, and I think I was not able to type and talk. So combined, somebody had asked, how does an ordinary citizen, what do we do with this information? It's very interesting. It's very enlightening. What do we do with it? And that also kind of ties it back to what Ashish was asking about, what are the next steps, right? So combining the two, I think bioregionalism at this point is a perspective. It's a way of thinking. There's a lot of the other aspects of it. There is this mapping aspect to it. There's a lot of research being done, and it is being done across the world. Like, for example, in South America, a big chunk of the Amazon forest that was falling within Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador have been given the rights to it, and the governance of it has been given back to some of the indigenous communities. And this is something that has come out of a bioregional effort. Right now, that is one solution which happened in one part of the world. And the idea is, I don't know whether that is the same thing that could happen here or not. But as citizens, I think using that as a perspective to for everything that we do in our sort of professions, let's say, is very important. Like whether it is when you buy land and build a house itself at a simple level, that question of how does this affect the bioregion, not just how does it affect my land or how does it affect the neighborhood, but how does it affect the bioregion? What is the bioregion? Is a sort of a question that that you can always work with, I feel. And regardless of what your background is, I think this is helpful to have this perspective. And it is a very evolving sort of methodology. It is being used in many ways by many people, whether it's indigenous land rights, or it is regenerative agriculture, whether it is climate change adaptation, whether it is governance of communities. Bioregionalism has a lot of input that can be empowering. And so, like, as a community, say what we could do. We at this stage we had a lot of limitations in terms of resources, reach, language understanding as well, because here we're like looking at very unconventional resources to build this map. And Manuji and I had to work off of the languages we knew and work off of the languages that the rest of the group could support us with. But India has more than 700 living languages and so many thousands of dialects. And of course, when we extend that to South Asia, that more than triples or quadruples, I imagine. So it needs to be a very decentralized effort, because we have to look through stories and folklore and build the understanding of bioregionalism. It has to be a very expanded effort, and that is potentially one of the next steps to make it a collective boundary making exercise, and decentralize it. Because at the end of the day, if we are sitting and producing a map and determining what that map is, we're really no different from the colonial way of dividing India and Pakistan, right? So the point is that this is a sort of an invitation, a tool, a methodology, and what we've done is a framework and an example, and it's just the first step for a lot more to come, and a lot more people to be involved in it as well. And the more people, the diversity of backgrounds involved, the diversity of perspectives also come into play, like mental health. It's honestly, it's not something I really thought of, and it's totally intriguing me. Like, how does this affect mental health? But yeah, so as ordinary people, or as professionals, or as citizens, however we look at it, I think bioregionalism gives a powerful perspective, and it gives vocabulary for a lot of the fights that are fights of our generation and the times to come. Yeah, and that's, I think with that, I'll hand the mic back.
If I could just come in. Deepalji, you said that, the regions should not stop at the boundaries of India. I fully agree. We have, the Ladakh region could easily extend into Aksai Chin, into Tibet. The Terai region, as it is, it's common to both India and Nepal. If we don't have the India-Pakistan border, then we would find that the Thar Desert extends into Cholistan, similar territory. So even if that boundary were to remain, idealistically, let us say, just as different districts lying in different states, but in the same bioregion could act as one, a similar kind of thing could idealistically be seen across the international border too. But of course, that is far in the future. So this is, my response to, your concern about the boundaries, not stopping at the Indian border. They certainly extend well beyond it.
So I think, Srishti, it's your floor now.
Thanks.
Could I just make one more comment?
Okay, that will have to be absolutely last one.
Okay. I would just like to share with the group that recently, during the course of surveys in Eastern India, we came across, that we have panchangs for smaller areas. Could these be possibly linked to the, bioregional characteristics? It's a question which I'm just laying open. Right. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. It's a great one. I will explore it, asking my family elders about this. Okay, so thank you very much, both to Nisha and Manuji, for this really fascinating presentation and study. It's been really thrilling to again hear you guys present this, despite having heard it one time before. And to Deepak ji for moderating the session so wonderfully, bringing really the right questions out that we need to be thinking through about it, and also for this group to deliberate more about. And to our attendees, I think some really good questions came about, something that we have been speaking to within our smaller group. And so it's great to see that so many people are thinking about these aspects and stressing on the idea that we have to, really think about this beyond boundaries. So have to think from a regional perspective, have to incorporate visions from Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and others such. So I'm so grateful to all of you for having and facilitating and being part of this space. A request to all of you who attended this session that if you want to stay in touch, there are other studies that we will be presenting through this group in the coming few months. So stay tuned. The links to our web pages will be in the chat right now. You can contact us through the email that we have, and also follow us on Instagram and Twitter to know more about what the group is doing. So great. Thank you so much, everybody, for this conversation, and hope to be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.